I had spent 50 years of my life building a fortune worth $2.4 million. Every penny saved, every investment carefully chosen, all with the intention of leaving something meaningful for my son Robert and his wife Diane. But last night I overheard a conversation that shattered my world. Diane was whispering to Robert, "When your mother dies, the first thing we'll do is transfer all that money to our own names and not share it with anyone." I stood frozen at the top of the stairs, my hand clutching the railing so tight my knuckles turned white. The next morning, I made a decision that would change everything. I've always been the kind of mother who believed in giving. When Robert was growing up, I worked 2 jobs after his father passed away. I put him through college, helped with the down payment on his first house, and was always there when he needed financial support. And I did it all gladly, because that's what mothers do. When Diane came into the picture 10 years ago, I welcomed her with open arms. She was charming, attentive, always asking about my health and bringing little gifts when they visited. I thought I was blessed to have such a caring daughter-in-law. How blind I had been. The signs were there, of course. The way Diane's eyes would linger on the antique silver I'd inherited from my grandmother. How she'd casually ask about my investments, my insurance policies, my will. I dismissed it as natural curiosity, or perhaps financial prudence. Now I knew better. That morning after overhearing their conversation, I sat at my kitchen table, a cup of tea growing cold between my hands. The house felt different somehow. Larger, emptier, as if the walls themselves had pulled away and shot. I had always imagined growing old here, perhaps with Robert and Diane moving in to care for me in my final years. Now that future felt like a cruel joke. I picked up my phone and made a call to James Henderson, my attorney for the past 30 years. "James," I said when he answered, "I need to see you today. It's urgent." There was something in my voice that must have alarmed him, because he cleared his schedule immediately. 2 hours later, I sat in his office, recounting what I'd overheard. James listened without interruption, his expression growing increasingly troubled. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and sighed. "Martha, I hate to say this, but I'm not entirely surprised. There have been inquiries." "What kind of inquiries?" I asked, my heart beginning to race. "Robert has called my office several times over the past few months, asking about the status of your will, the details of your estate. I told him I couldn't discuss those matters without your permission. But he was persistent. He mentioned concerns about your mental capacity, suggested that perhaps it was time to consider a power of attorney." The room seemed to tilt slightly. "My mental capacity is perfectly fine," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "I know that," James said gently. "But if someone were to suggest otherwise, if they had a doctor's evaluation to back up their claims, it could become complicated." "A doctor's evaluation?" Suddenly, I remembered how insistent Diane had been about me seeing her friend, Dr. Peterson, for a routine checkup, she'd said. How convenient that would have been for them. "What do I do, James?" I asked, hating the tremor in my voice. He considered for a moment. "First, we protect your assets. I suggest we create a trust, one that Robert and Diane cannot access or control. Second, we update your will. And third," he hesitated, "we gather evidence." "Evidence?" "If they're planning what we suspect, there will be a paper trail. Emails, text messages, perhaps consultations with other attorneys. It won't be pleasant, Martha, but you need to know exactly what you're dealing with." As I left James's office, my phone buzzed with a text from Robert. "Mom, Diane and I are thinking of stopping by for dinner tonight. She's making your favorite apple pie." The casual deception of it, the performance of affection while they plotted behind my back, made something harden inside me. I typed back, "Sounds lovely. Can't wait to see you both." That night, as I prepared dinner in the kitchen, I'd cooked thousands of meals in. I realized something important. This house wasn't just walls and a roof. It was a stage, and I had been cast in a role without my knowledge. The dutiful mother, the generous benefactor, slowly being guided toward her final exit. But what Robert and Diane didn't realize was that I wasn't ready for my final bow. Not even close. As I heard their car pull into the driveway, I straightened my shoulders and practiced my smile. The real performance was about to begin, and they had no idea that I had rewritten the script. What would happen next would shock even me. But first, I needed to understand exactly how deep their betrayal went. I greeted Robert and Diane at the door with the same warm smile I'd always given them. Robert kissed my cheek, and Diane handed me a bouquet of lilies, my second favorite flower. She'd always remembered that roses were my favorite until now. Another small sign I'd missed. "The house smells wonderful, Mom," Robert said, hanging up his coat. "What are you cooking?" "Pot roast," I replied. "The way your father liked it." A flicker of impatience crossed his face. He'd never enjoyed when I mentioned his father. Another sign. Dinner was a performance worthy of Broadway. I played my part, the slightly forgetful mother, the generous matriarch. I mentioned my appointment with James Henderson that morning, watching their reactions carefully. "Your attorney?" Diane asked, her fork pausing halfway to her mouth. "Is everything okay?" "Oh, just routine updates," I said vaguely. At my age, it's important to keep these things current. Robert and Diane exchanged a quick glance. "Anything we should know about?" Robert asked, his tone casual but his eyes sharp. "Nothing important," I said, serving more potatoes. Though James did mention something interesting. Apparently, someone's been calling his office, asking about my will. "Isn't that strange?" The color drained from Robert's face. "That is strange," he agreed, his voice slightly higher than normal. "Probably just a mix-up." "Probably," I agreed pleasantly. "More wine, Diane." After dinner, while Diane was in the bathroom, Robert cornered me in the kitchen. "Mom," he said in a low voice, "Diane and I have been talking. We're worried about you living here alone. The stairs, the maintenance, it's a lot for someone your age." "I manage just fine," I replied, rinsing dishes. "We know you do," he said, placing a hand on my shoulder. "But we've been thinking, maybe it's time to consider alternatives. Our house has that beautiful guest suite downstairs. Or there are some really nice retirement communities. Where you can keep an eye on me?" I interrupted, my tone still light. He blinked, surprised by my directness. "Well, yes, for your safety." "How thoughtful," I murmured. The bathroom door opened, and Diane rejoined us, ending the conversation. But I'd heard enough. After they left, I sat in my living room, thinking about the trust James and I had set up that morning. Robert and Diane would expect me to have my assets tied up in the house, in my investment accounts, all neatly documented in my will. They wouldn't expect the new trust, with its carefully selected trustees, none of whom were family members. The next day, I visited my bank and discovered something that confirmed my worst suspicions. There had been inquiries about my accounts, inquiries made by Robert, using my social security number and other personal information. He hadn't accessed the accounts yet, but he was laying the groundwork. The bank manager concerned helped me set up new security measures and suggested I monitor my credit report. That afternoon, I called Diane's mother, Eleanor. We'd always had a cordial relationship, though not particularly close. "Eleanor," I said after the usual pleasantries, "I've been thinking about family history recently. Health issues, that sort of thing. Has there been any Alzheimer's in your family?" There was a pause on the line. "No," she said finally. "Why do you ask?" "Oh, just curious," I replied. Robert and Diane seemed very concerned about my memory lately. They've been suggesting I see a specialist. Another, longer pause. "Martha," Eleanor said slowly. "Diane mentioned something to me about this. She said, you've been struggling, forgetting things, getting confused." She was quite concerned. My hand tightened on the phone. "Is that right? How interesting." "Because my doctor gave me a clean bill of health just last month. Perfect cognitive function for a woman half my age," he said. The silence that followed told me everything I needed to know. Diane had been laying the groundwork, creating a narrative of my mental decline. Not just to Robert, but to others who might later be called upon to corroborate their story. After hanging up, I sat at my kitchen table, a cold anger settling over me. They weren't just after my money. They were trying to erase me, to diminish me, to transform me from a person into a problem to be managed. And then, when the time was right, an estate to be divided. I picked up my phone again and called James. I need to make some changes, I said without preamble. To everything. What I did next would change the course of all our lives. But first, I needed to understand why. Why my own son would conspire against me. The answer, when it came, would be more painful than I could have imagined. The next morning, I did something I'd never done before. I hired a private investigator. Frank Doherty was a retired police detective who now specialized in financial fraud cases. James recommended him highly. What exactly are we looking for? Frank asked, as we sat in his sparse office. I'm not sure, I admitted. Evidence of their plans, I suppose. Communications, consultations with estate attorneys, anything that shows they've been plotting this. Frank nodded, making notes. And your son has access to your personal information, social security number, birth certificate, that sort of thing. He's my son, I said simply. Of course he does. Frank's expression softened slightly. Mrs. Miller, in my experience, family fraud is the most common kind, precisely because of that trust. We'll need to check for new credit cards, loans, anything opened in your name. We'll also monitor your existing accounts for unusual activity. The investigation took 3 weeks. I continued my performance at home, playing the increasingly forgetful mother. I misplaced my keys deliberately. I repeated questions I'd already asked. I watched as Robert and Diane exchanged meaningful glances, their plans seemingly falling into place. Frank's findings, when they came, were worse than I had imagined. Robert had indeed been building a case for my mental incompetence. He'd consulted with an elder law attorney about guardianship proceedings. He'd spoken with Diane's friend, Dr. Peterson, about cognitive assessments that could be done without the patient's full understanding of their purpose. But the most shocking discovery came from Robert's emails. Frank had managed to access them legally, through methods I didn't ask about. In them, Robert discussed not just my estate, but his mounting gambling debts. Thousands of dollars owed to people who weren't known for their patience. His desperation explained the urgency of their plan. He needs money, I said flatly when Frank showed me the evidence. That's what this is all about. It seems so, Frank agreed. But Mrs. Miller, these people he owes money to, they're dangerous. If he's promised them payment based on your assets, the implication hung in the air between us. My son was not just betraying me, he was putting me in danger. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling of my bedroom. This room where I'd nursed Robert through childhood illnesses, where I'd mourned my husband, where I'd believed I would peacefully live out my remaining years. Now it felt like a cell in a prison of betrayal. The next morning, I made my decision. I called Robert. I've been thinking about what you said, about the house being too much for me, I began. Oh? His voice was carefully neutral, but I could hear the anticipation. Yes, I think you might be right. In fact, I've decided to sell the house. There was a pause. Sell it? Mom, that's a big decision. We should talk about this in person. Maybe Diane and I could come over tonight. No need, I interrupted. I've already spoken with a realtor. They're coming this afternoon to assess the property. Mom, wait. Let's not be hasty. This house has been in our family for decades. What about all the memories? Memories don't pay the bills, Robert, I said, using one of his own frequent phrases against him. And frankly, I could use the money. Another pause, longer this time. What do you mean, you could use the money? I thought your finances were comfortable. They were, I said. But investments change. Markets fluctuate. You know how it is. Mom, what are you saying? Is there something wrong with your finances? I allowed myself a small, cold smile. Unseen over the phone. Nothing for you to worry about, dear. I'll manage. I always have. After hanging up, I sat back feeling a grim satisfaction. The seed was planted. If Robert believed my fortune was diminished or gone, how would that change his plans? Would he abandon them and me entirely? Or would it drive him to more desperate measures? I was playing a dangerous game, but then, so were they. The difference was, I now knew all the players and all the rules, and I was changing both. That afternoon, as promised, a realtor did come to my house, but not to sell it. Instead, Jeremy Keller from Keller Properties helped me transfer the deed into the name of the trust James and I had established. On paper, I no longer owned my own home, and that was just the beginning. What I did next would force Robert and Diane to reveal their true intentions. But I never expected the confrontation that followed, or the painful truth it would uncover about the son I thought I knew. The next morning, Robert arrived at my door unannounced, his face flushed with barely controlled anger. "Mom, we need to talk about this house situation," he said as he brushed past me into the hallway. "Good morning to you too, Robert," I replied calmly, closing the door behind him. "Would you like some coffee?" "I don't want coffee," he snapped. "I want to know what's going on. I drove by yesterday and saw a sign from Keller Properties. Are you seriously selling the house without discussing it with me first?" I walked toward the kitchen, forcing him to follow. "I wasn't aware I needed your permission to make decisions about my own property," I said, filling the kettle. "Coffee?" He ignored the offer again. "It's not about permission. It's about family. This house is part of our heritage. Dad built this house." "Yes, he did," I agreed, measuring coffee grounds. "For me," Robert ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so like his father it made my heart ache, despite everything. "Mom, I'm worried about you. These sudden decisions, the forgetfulness. Diane and I both think it might be time for a professional assessment." I turned to face him fully. "A professional assessment of what exactly?" He hesitated, then pushed ahead. "Your cognitive function. Mom, sometimes you repeat yourself. You misplace things. You seem confused about financial matters." "Do I?" I asked mildly. "Yes. Like this sudden claim that you need money. You have over $2 million in assets. Why would you need to sell the house?" I raised an eyebrow. "You seem very certain about the state of my finances, Robert." He faltered. You've mentioned it before." "Have I? I don't recall discussing specific figures with you." I poured hot water over the coffee grounds, the rich aroma filling the kitchen. "But since you brought it up, things change. Investments don't always perform as expected." "What are you saying? That you've lost money? How much?" The naked panic in his voice confirmed everything. This wasn't concern for my welfare. This was fear for his inheritance. "Enough that selling the house makes sense," I said vaguely. He stared at me, calculations visibly running behind his eyes. "I want to see your financial statements," he said finally. "If there's a problem, maybe I can help." "That won't be necessary," I replied, pouring a cup of coffee. "I have James Henderson to advise me." "Henderson," Robert muttered. "He's almost as old as you are. What does he know about modern investment strategies?" "Enough to keep me comfortable all these years," I said. Then, changing tactics, "Robert, why are you really here? Is it concern for me, or concern for what will be left when I'm gone?" His face flushed darker. "That's unfair. Of course I'm concerned about you." "Are you? Then why have you been checking on my bank accounts? Why have you consulted with an elder law attorney about guardianship proceedings?" The color drained from his face. "How did you? And why?" I continued, my voice hardening. "Have you been telling people, including Diane's mother, that I'm showing signs of dementia?" He took a step back. "You've been investigating me?" "I've been protecting myself," I corrected, "which appears to have been necessary." For a moment he looked like the little boy who'd been caught stealing cookies. Shocked, guilty, but already formulating an excuse. Then his expression changed. hardened. You don't understand the pressure I'm under. The gambling debts? I interrupted. Yes, I know about those too. He stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. How long have you known? Long enough, I said. What I don't understand is why you didn't just come to me, Robert. I would have helped you. I've always helped you. Because I knew what you'd say, he shot back. That I should be more responsible, that I should tell Diane, that I should get help. He spat the last word like it was poison. And those would have been bad suggestions. I don't need help, he shouted. I need money. Money that's gonna be mine eventually anyway. There it was. The ugly truth laid bare. I set down my coffee cup carefully, afraid that if I didn't focus on this small action, I might shatter completely. So your plan was what, exactly? Have me declared incompetent? Take control of my assets? Rob me of my dignity along with my savings? It wasn't like that, he muttered, but his eyes slid away from mine. What was it like then, Robert? Please explain to me how a son conspires against his mother. I'd really like to understand. He had no answer. We stood in the kitchen, the heart of the home where I'd raised him, separated by more than just the granite island between us. I think you should leave, I said finally. Mom! Now, Robert. After he left, I sank into a chair, allowing myself a moment of pure grief. The baby I'd held, the child I'd raised, the man I'd been so proud of, had any of that been real? Or had I been blind to his true nature all along? I pulled out my phone and called James. It's time for phase 2, I said, my voice steady despite the ache in my heart. What happened next would test not just the legal structures we'd put in place, but the very essence of what family means. And it would begin with a dinner invitation that Robert and Diane couldn't possibly refuse. The invitation was simple: dinner at the Capitol Grill, Robert and Diane's favorite restaurant. The kind of place where steaks cost more than some people's weekly grocery budget, and the wine list ran to dozens of pages. The kind of place that signaled this was a special occasion. They accepted immediately, of course. Perhaps they thought this was a peace offering, or better yet, a chance to continue their campaign to convince me of my own incompetence. I arrived early and requested a private dining room. Money may not buy happiness, but it does buy privacy, and what I had planned required discretion. James Henderson arrived next, followed by Frank Doherty. We were seated and waiting when Robert and Diane walked in. Their faces registered shock, then weariness, as they took in my companions. Mom, Robert said carefully, what's this about? Please, sit down, I said, gesturing to the empty chairs. I believe you know James, my attorney. And this is Frank Doherty, a private investigator I've engaged. Diane's eyes widened. A private investigator. Martha, what on earth? Please, I repeated, my voice firmer. Sit down. They complied, exchanging glances loaded with unspoken communication. I've asked you here because we have important matters to discuss, I began. Matters concerning my estate and your expectations regarding it. Robert shifted uncomfortably. Mom, if this is about our conversation the other day, it's about much more than that. I interrupted. It's about bank account inquiries made using my social security number. It's about consultations with attorneys specializing in guardianship proceedings. It's about a systematic campaign to portray me as mentally incompetent. I nodded to Frank, who slid a folder across the table. It's about evidence. Robert didn't touch the folder. You've been spying on us, he said, his voice flat. I've been defending myself. I corrected. There's a difference. Diane reached for the folder, opening it with trembling fingers. Her face paled as she scanned the contents. Printouts of emails, phone records, meeting notes from Robert's consultations with various attorneys. This is private correspondence, she said, looking up at me with genuine shock. You had no right. I had every right, I cut in. When you conspire to have someone declared incompetent, to take control of their assets, to essentially erase their autonomy, they have every right to defend themselves by any legal means necessary. And everything in that folder was obtained legally. Isn't that right, Frank? Frank nodded. Absolutely. Every document, every record, all acquired through legal channels. Diane turned to Robert, her expression shifting from shock to something harder, more calculating. You told me she was forgetting things, having episodes. You said the doctor confirmed it, so she hadn't known everything. Interesting. Robert flushed. She was. She is. This whole investigation proves it. Paranoid delusions. Stop it, Robert, I said, my voice low but firm. There is no dementia, no cognitive decline, no episodes. There is only a son who saw his mother as an obstacle to solving his financial problems. Diane's gaze moved between us. What financial problems? The genuine confusion in her voice told me what I needed to know. She'd been complicit in some aspects of their plan, but not all. Robert had kept his gambling debt secret, even from her. Perhaps you should ask your husband about his gambling habits, I suggested, and the people he owes money to. Diane turned to Robert, who seemed to shrink in his chair. Gambling? Robert, what is she talking about? Before he could answer, James cleared his throat. If I may, he said, pulling out his own folder. Mrs. Miller has asked me to outline the changes made to her estate plan, in light of recent developments. Robert's head snapped up. Changes? What changes? James adjusted his glasses. Mrs. Miller has established an irrevocable trust which now holds the majority of her assets, including her home. She retains the right to live in the property for the remainder of her life, but the house itself, along with her investment portfolios and other holdings, are now legally owned by the trust. She can't do that, Robert said, looking desperately between James and me. She's not competent to make those decisions. Actually, James continued smoothly, Mrs. Miller recently underwent a comprehensive cognitive assessment with Dr. Leonard Shapiro, a leading neurologist specializing in geriatric medicine. His report, which has been filed with the trust documents, confirms that she is of sound mind and fully capable of managing her affairs. The trap was closing, and Robert knew it. This is a mistake, he said, his voice rising. Mom, you're being manipulated by these people. They're taking advantage of you. No, Robert, I said quietly. That's what you were doing. Diane, who had been silent, suddenly stood up. I need some air, she said, her voice tight. She looked at Robert with an expression I couldn't quite read. Disgust, perhaps, or simply the shock of discovering the man she married wasn't who she thought he was. Then she walked out. Robert watched her go, his face ashen. Then he turned back to me. So that's it? You're cutting me off? Your own son? The pain in his voice nearly broke my resolve. Despite everything, he was still my child. No, I said after a moment. Not entirely. I nodded to James, who continued. The trust specifies that Robert will receive a monthly stipend. Not enough to fund an extravagant lifestyle, but enough to live comfortably if managed wisely. Additionally, the trust will pay directly for any addiction treatment programs he chooses to enter. Addiction treatment? Robert sputtered. I'm not an addict. The evidence suggests otherwise, Frank said quietly. Your betting patterns, the escalating amounts, the increasing risks, classic signs of gambling addiction. Robert looked at me, real fear in his eyes now. And if I refuse this stipend, these conditions, then you receive nothing, I said simply. The remainder of the trust will pass to charities upon my death. He stared at me, and for a moment I saw a flicker of the sun I'd raised, vulnerable, uncertain. Then his expression hardened. You'll regret this, he said, standing up. You think you've won, but you're just a lonely old woman who's going to die alone. The words were meant to wound, and they did. But I'd already faced the worst pain discovering my son's betrayal. Nothing he could say now would cut deeper than that. You're wrong, Robert, I said as he turned to leave. I'm not alone. I have people who genuinely care about me, not just my money. I hope someday you'll understand the difference. He left without another word. The dining room fell silent. James patted my hand awkwardly. You did the right thing, Martha. Did I? I wasn't so sure anymore. I'd protected myself, yes, but at what cost? The dinner I'd ordered for 5 went largely untouched. As I prepared to leave, the waiter brought the check. I reached for it, but Frank stopped me. "Allow me," he said. "For what it's worth, Mrs. Miller, in my line of work, I see a lot of families torn apart by money, but rarely do I see someone handle it with as much grace and fairness as you have." His kindness nearly undid me. I thanked him, gathered my purse, and left the restaurant, stepping into a world that felt fundamentally changed. The battle was over, but the war that had just begun. And the next move wasn't mine, it was Robert's. What he did next would shock me to my core, but not in the way I expected. Sometimes, even in the darkest betrayal, there's a glimmer of hope. And sometimes, that hope comes from the most unexpected places. I didn't hear from Robert for 2 weeks after our dinner at the Capitol Grill. Diane called once, her voice hesitant, to ask if we could meet for coffee to talk about some things. I agreed, curious about what she had to say without Robert present. We met at a small cafe downtown, neutral territory. She looked tired, the carefully applied makeup not quite concealing the shadows under her eyes. "Thank you for meeting me," she said after we'd ordered. "I know things are complicated right now." "That's one word for it," I agreed. "How are you, Diane?" She twisted her wedding ring, a nervous gesture I'd never noticed before. "I've been better. Robert and I, we're taking some time apart." This surprised me. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and meant it. Despite everything, I didn't wish unhappiness on either of them. "Don't be," she said with a bitter smile. "It's been a long time coming. I just didn't want to see it." She looked up at me directly. "I want you to know that I didn't know about the gambling, or the debts, or his plans to have you declared incompetent. I knew he was concerned about your memory, but I thought that was genuine worry. Not a scheme." I studied her face, looking for any sign of deception. "What did you know, Diane?" She had the grace to look ashamed. "I knew he was anxious about the inheritance. He kept talking about what we'd do with the money when you were gone. It made me uncomfortable, but I told myself it was normal to plan for the future." "And the conversations about me moving out of my house? Into assisted living? Or your guest room?" She sighed. "That was more complicated. Robert presented it as concern for your safety. But yes, I knew he was also thinking about selling the house for the proceeds." She met my eyes again. "I was wrong not to question him more. I'm sorry." Her apology seemed sincere, but I'd been fooled before. "What happens now? With you and Robert?" "I don't know," she admitted. "He's angry. At you, at me, at the world. He refuses to consider that he might have a gambling problem. He's staying with a friend while she trailed off. "While you decide whether your marriage is worth saving," I finished for her. She nodded, blinking back tears. "I love him, or I loved the person I thought he was. I'm not sure anymore." We sat in silence for a moment, 2 women connected by our relationship to the same flawed man. "What about you?" she asked, finally. "What happens now for you?" It was a good question. I'd been so focused on protecting myself, on uncovering the plot against me, that I hadn't really thought about what came after. "I'm not sure either," I admitted. "Continue living my life, I suppose, on my own terms. I hope we can not go back to how things were, because I see now that wasn't as perfect as I thought, but maybe find a new way forward. Eventually." I wasn't ready to make any promises. Perhaps. Time will tell. After Diane left, I sat alone in the cafe, thinking about forgiveness and its limits. Could I ever trust Robert again? Could I look at him without seeing the betrayal? I didn't know. A week later, I received a letter from Robert. Not an email or a text, but a handwritten letter on actual stationery. Something so old-fashioned and unexpected that I stared at the envelope for a full minute before opening it. "Dear Mom," it began. "I don't know how to start this letter. I'm sorry seems inadequate for what I've done. And yet I am sorry. More sorry than I've ever been for anything in my life. I read on as Robert detailed his gambling addiction, how it had started as occasional sports betting with colleagues, then escalated as he chased losses, convinced that one big win would solve everything, how the debts mounted until he became desperate enough to consider the unthinkable, exploiting his own mother's assets. I told myself it wasn't really stealing, he wrote, that the money would be mine eventually anyway, that I was just accessing it a little early. I convinced myself you wouldn't mind if you knew, that you'd want to help me, but I was too ashamed to ask directly, and then too desperate to care about the ethics of what I was planning. The letter continued, describing his shock at discovering my counter-investigation, his humiliation at being exposed, and finally, his reluctant entry into a Gamblers Anonymous program at Diane's insistence. I'm in treatment now, he wrote. Not because of the trust conditions, though I'm grateful for that lifeline, but because I finally see what I've become, what I almost lost. What I may have lost already. The letter ended with a request. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But if you're willing, I'd like to see you. To apologize in person. To begin the long process of earning back your trust. If that's even possible. I set the letter down, my hands trembling slightly. Was this genuine remorse, or another manipulation? The cynical part of me, the part that had been hurt and betrayed, suspected the latter. But the mother in me, the part that had loved Robert from the moment I first held him, wanted desperately to believe in redemption. I called Frank Doherty. I need you to verify something for me, I said, and explained about Robert's claimed entry into a treatment program. 2 days later, Frank confirmed that Robert had indeed enrolled in a residential gambling addiction treatment center. He was 1 week into a 30-day program, attending daily therapy sessions, and Gamblers Anonymous meetings. It wasn't proof of genuine change, but it was a start. I waited until Robert had completed 2 weeks of his program, before I responded to his letter. I kept my reply simple. I'll see you when you've completed the full 30 days. We can talk then. When the day finally came, I suggested we meet at a small park near my house. Neutral ground, but more private than a restaurant. I arrived early, sitting on a bench overlooking a pond where ducks swam lazily in the afternoon sun. Robert approached slowly, as if unsure of his welcome. He looked different, thinner, more subdued, but also clearer somehow, his eyes more focused than I'd seen them in years. Mom, he said simply, stopping a few feet away. Robert, I replied, gesturing to the space beside me. Sit down. He did, leaving a respectful distance between us. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then, thank you for agreeing to see me. I nodded, studying his face. How are you? Better, he said. Clearer. The program. It helped me see things I've been avoiding for a long time. He took a deep breath. Mom, what I did, what I plan to do, it's unforgivable. I know that. I'm not here asking for forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I understand now how wrong I was. And I'm truly sorry. Why, Robert? I asked, the question that had haunted me for weeks. Why not just come to me? I would have helped you. He stared at the pond, shame evident in his posture. Pride at first. I didn't want to admit I'd messed up so badly. Then fear, as the debts got worse. And finally, addiction. By the end, I wasn't thinking clearly about anything except getting money to keep betting, to chase that one big win that would solve everything. It was the answer I'd expected, but it still hurt to hear. And Diane? How are things with her? Tentative, he admitted. She's agreed to couples counseling when I finish the program. She's still living in the house. I'm staying in an apartment near the treatment center. She says she's willing to try, but she needs to see real change. He glanced at me. I can't blame her for that. No, I agreed. You can't. We sat in silence for a while, watching the ducks. A mother duck led a line of ducklings, all following obediently behind her. The symbolism wasn't lost on either of us. What happens now? Robert finally asked. Between us, I mean. I'd thought long and hard about this question. I don't know yet, I answered honestly. Trust, once broken, isn't easily repaired. But, he prompted when I paused. But you're my son, I said simply. That doesn't change, even when everything else does. His eyes filled with tears, the first genuine emotion I'd seen from him in a long time. I don't deserve a second chance. Probably not, I agreed. But that's the thing about chances. They're not always about what we deserve. I told him about the adjustments James and I had made to the trust. Robert would still receive a monthly stipend, but it would be managed by a financial advisor who would report any concerning patterns. He would need to continue with therapy and Gamblers Anonymous meetings, verified by periodic reports to the trust administrator. And the trust would pay directly for Diane's counseling as well, if she wanted it. These aren't punishments, I explained. They're guardrails to help you rebuild your life on a solid foundation. Robert nodded, accepting the conditions without protest. And us? Can we ever go back to how things were? I shook my head. No, that's not possible. Too much has happened. I saw the pain in his eyes and added, but maybe we can build something new, something different, something based on honesty this time. It was a small olive branch, not forgiveness exactly, but an opening. A possibility. As we parted, Robert hesitated, then said, Mom, there's something else you should know about the house. My guard went up immediately. What about it? I told some people, the people I owed money to, that I would pay them from the proceeds when we sold it. When that didn't happen, he looked away. They might try to contact you. I've been working with the police, giving them information, but you should be careful. A chill ran through me. Are you saying I'm in danger? I don't think so, he said quickly. The main guy was arrested last week. But just be aware. Maybe stay with a friend for a while. This was what Frank had warned about. The dangerous people Robert owed money to. I thanked him for the warning, promised to be careful, and watched him walk away, his shoulders bowed under the weight of his mistakes. That night, as I prepared for bed, I heard a noise downstairs, a soft thud like something being knocked over. I froze, Robert's warning fresh in my mind. I reached for my phone, ready to call 911, when a floorboard creaked directly outside my bedroom door. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew one thing for certain. I hadn't survived 78 years and a betrayal by my own son, only to become a victim now. Whatever came through that door would find a woman ready to fight for her life, and for the future that was still rightfully hers. The doorknob turned slowly. I gripped my phone tighter, finger poised over the emergency call button. The door began to open, a sliver of darkness widening into my dimly lit bedroom. Martha? A familiar voice whispered. Are you awake? Relief flooded through me. Diane? What on earth are you doing here at this hour? She slipped into the room, closing the door behind her. Even in the low light, I could see she was agitated, her movements jerky and nervous. I'm sorry to frighten you. I used the spare key you gave us for emergencies. I had to warn you. I switched on the bedside lamp. Diane blinked in the sudden brightness, and I saw her face clearly for the first time. A dark bruise bloomed across her left cheekbone. My God, Diane, what happened to you? I pushed back the covers and stood, moving toward her. She touched her cheek self-consciously. Robert happened. He came home tonight, said he needed to get some things from the house. He'd been drinking. When I asked about his treatment program, he laughed and said he'd been lying to everyone, to the counselors. To you, to me. My heart sank. The treatment program. He's not attending? Oh, he's attending, she said bitterly. He's physically there. But he told me he's just going through the motions, saying what they want to hear. He has no intention of stopping gambling. He said it's the only thing that makes him feel alive. I guided her to sit on the edge of the bed. And your face? Did he hit you? She nodded, tears spilling over. It's the first time he's ever done that. When I told him I was filing for divorce, He just snapped, started talking about the money he was going to get from you. How I wasn't going to see a penny of it. What money from me? I asked, though I already knew the answer. He said he had a new plan, that he'd taken care of it, and would be coming into a large sum, very soon. When I asked what that meant, he hit me. She looked up at me, fear evident in her eyes. Martha, I think he's arranged something. Something bad. I heard him on the phone earlier, talking about the house, about insurance policies. When he saw me listening, he ended the call quickly, but there was something in his eyes, something frightening. A cold dread settled in my stomach. Did you call the police about the assault? She shook her head. I was too scared. I just waited until he left and came straight here. I think you might be in danger. I reached for my phone again. We need to call the police right now. Wait. Diane caught my wrist. There's something else. Something I need to tell you first. She took a deep breath, seeming to gather her courage. I wasn't entirely honest with you before. About what I knew. I sat back, watching her carefully. Go on. I did know about Robert's gambling. Not the extent of it, but I knew. And I knew about his plans to access your money. I didn't know he was going to try to have you declared incompetent. That shocked me, but I knew he was planning something. She couldn't meet my eyes. I was in debt too, shopping, mostly. Credit cards. Robert said he'd take care of it when your estate came to us. The admission hurt, but it wasn't entirely surprising. The perfectly styled hair, the designer clothes, the expensive car. Diane had always lived as if money were no object. Why are you telling me this now? Because I need you to believe me about the danger. Because I'm ashamed of what I almost became a part of. And because, she hesitated, because despite everything, I care about you. You've always been kind to me, even when I didn't deserve it. I believed her. The fear in her eyes was too real to be feigned, and the bruise on her face told its own story. I picked up my phone again. We're calling the police. Right now. As I dialed, a thunderous crash came from downstairs. The sound of breaking glass, followed by heavy footsteps. Diane's eyes widened in terror. He followed me, she whispered. 911? What's your emergency? Came the operator's voice, through my phone. This is Martha Miller, at 5042 Oakwood Drive, I said, keeping my voice low and steady. Someone has broken into my home. My daughter-in-law and I are upstairs, barricaded in the bedroom. Please hurry. I ended the call and moved quickly to lock the bedroom door, then pushed a heavy dresser in front of it for good measure. Diane helped me, her movements fueled by fear. Martha! Robert's voice bellowed from downstairs. I know you're up there. I know Diane came here. The rage in his voice was unlike anything I'd ever heard from my son. This wasn't the Robert I'd raised. This was something else entirely. Is there another way out of here? Diane whispered frantically. I shook my head. The second floor had no exterior access except through windows that would require a dangerous drop to the ground below. Heavy footsteps pounded up the stairs. Martha, open the door. The police are on their way, Robert, I called back, trying to keep my voice calm despite the terror coursing through me. Whatever you're thinking of doing, it's not too late to stop. A harsh laugh answered me. It's been too late for a long time, Mother. Too late for all of us. Something slammed against the bedroom door, making it shudder in its frame. The dresser shifted slightly with the impact. Another slam, and another. The wood of the door began to splinter. Diane and I retreated to the far corner of the room. I grabbed a heavy lamp, the only weapon within reach. Diane clutched her phone, the screen illuminating her terrified face as she frantically typed something. With a final crash, the door gave way, the dresser toppling forward. Robert stepped over the wreckage, a fire poker in his hand, and a wild look in his eyes. Hello, Mother, he said, his voice eerily calm now. And Diane, how convenient to find you both here. Saves me a trip. Robert, I said, raising the lamp defensively. This isn't you, This isn't who you are. But it is, he replied, advancing slowly. It's who I've become, who you helped make me, with your endless expectations, your constant disappointment. That's not true, I protested. I've always loved you, always supported you. Your kind of love comes with conditions, he spat. Be successful, be responsible, be grateful. What about my needs? What about what I want? And what is it you want, Robert? I asked, trying to keep him talking. To buy time until the police arrived. A strange smile spread across his face. Peace, freedom from debt, freedom from failure, and a very sizable insurance payout that will solve all my problems. Diane gasped. Insurance? Robert, what have you done? Nothing yet, he said, his eyes never leaving mine. But I'm about to solve everything. A tragic accident. A house fire. Mother sadly perished in her sleep. And you, my dear wife, surprised me at home in a jealous rage, attacked me, then fled here to confront my mother. I followed, trying to stop you, but alas, I was too late. The calculated madness in his eyes chilled me to the bone. This wasn't an impulsive act of violence. This was a planned murder. My son had come here tonight to kill me, and Diane, too, to eliminate witnesses. You won't get away with this, Diane said, her voice shaking. I've already sent messages, told people what you're planning. Robert's expression hardened. You're bluffing, and even if you're not, it doesn't matter. Your phone will melt in the fire, along with everything else in this house. In the distance, I heard what Robert didn't seem to notice. Sirens, growing louder. Help was coming, but would it arrive in time? Put down the poker, Robert, I said, meeting his gaze steadily. It's over. You know it's over. Something flashed in his eyes. Uncertainty, perhaps, or a flicker of the sun I once knew. For a moment, I thought he might actually listen. Then his face contorted with rage, and he lunged forward, the poker raised high. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Diane threw herself toward Robert, catching him off balance. They struggled, a chaotic tangle of limbs and fury. The poker clattered to the floor. I darted forward, kicking it away under the bed. Robert shoved Diane hard, sending her crashing into the wall. He turned to me, his hands outstretched like claws. You ruined everything, he snarled. As his hands closed around my throat, a tremendous crash came from downstairs, followed by shouts of police. Drop your weapons. Hands where we can see them. Relief surged through me. But Robert's grip only tightened. His face loomed over mine, twisted with hatred and desperation. Black spots danced at the edges of my vision as I struggled to breathe. Then suddenly, his weight was gone. Diane had recovered, grabbing a heavy crystal vase from my dresser and bringing it down on Robert's head with all her strength. He collapsed to the floor just as police officers poured into the room, weapons drawn. The next hours passed in a blur of paramedics, police statements, and crime scene technicians. Robert was taken away in handcuffs, a bandage on his head, still unconscious from Diane's blow. Diane and I sat wrapped in shock blankets in the back of an ambulance, giving our statements to a detective with kind eyes and infinite patience. You saved my life, I told Diane when we were finally alone. She shook her head. After everything I was complicit in, it was the least I could do. She looked at me, her bruised face streaked with tears. I'm so sorry, Martha, for all of it. I reached over and took her hand. We've both been betrayed by the same man. Perhaps we can help each other heal from that. As dawn broke over my damaged home, I realized something important. Family isn't always defined by blood. Sometimes it's forged in crisis, in shared trauma, in the choices we make when facing our darkest moments. Robert would face justice for what he'd done. The trust would remain intact, protecting my assets from his reach. And I would rebuild my home, my life, my sense of safety. But I wouldn't do it alone. Sometimes, the deepest betrayals lead to the most unexpected alliances. And sometimes, family is what we make it. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected. the wooden benches worn smooth by years of anxious spectators. I sat in the front row, my back straight despite the ache that had settled permanently between my shoulder blades since that terrible night. Diane sat beside me, a tissue clutched in her trembling hand. This was the preliminary hearing, the first step in what the district attorney had warned would be a lengthy legal process. Robert faced multiple charges: breaking and entering, assault, attempted murder, conspiracy to commit insurance fraud. The evidence against him was substantial, not just our testimony, but the detailed plans investigators had found on his computer, the incriminating text to the men he'd hired to help stage the accidental fire, and the newly purchased insurance policy on my life with him as the sole beneficiary. When they brought him in, I almost didn't recognize him. The confident, charming son I'd raised was gone, replaced by a hollow-eyed stranger in an orange jumpsuit. He shuffled to the defendant's table, the chains on his ankles clinking softly with each step. He didn't look at me, not once during the entire proceeding. The judge denied bail, citing the violent nature of the crimes and the substantial flight risk. As they led Robert away, he finally turned, his eyes meeting mine for a brief moment. I expected to see hatred, or perhaps a plea for help. Instead, there was nothing, a blank emptiness that frightened me more than rage ever could. "He's gone," Diane whispered beside me. "The Robert we knew. He's just gone." I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. We left the courthouse together, stepping into the bright sunshine that seemed obscenely cheerful given the circumstances. "What will you do now?" I asked Diane as we walked to the parking lot. She sighed. "File for divorce, obviously. Look for a job. I haven't worked since we got married, but I used to be a decent graphic designer. Start over somehow." She glanced at me. "What about you?" "I can't stay in that house," I admitted. "Too many memories now. Too much pain." "Where will you go?" I hadn't told anyone my plans yet, but something about Diane's genuine concern made me want to share. "I'm thinking of buying a small cottage by the lake. I've always loved it there. Room enough for me, a garden, maybe a dog." "That sounds nice," she said wistfully. An impulsive thought struck me. "There's a guest house on the property, nothing fancy, but it has its own entrance. A small kitchen. If you needed a place to stay while you get back on your feet." She stopped walking, staring at me in disbelief. "You'd do that? After everything? You saved my life, Diane. And you're starting over, just like me. Maybe we could help each other." Tears filled her eyes. "Why are you being so kind to me?" I thought about it for a moment. Because kindness is a choice. And after all the betrayal and pain, I choose kindness. It's how I want to live whatever time I have left. 2 months later, I stood on the deck of my new lakeside cottage, watching the sunset paint the water gold and crimson. The moving company had just delivered the last of my belongings, the few things I'd decided to keep from my old life. Most of my furniture, clothes, and household items had been donated or sold. This new chapter called for a clean slate. The guest house renovation was nearly complete. Diane had insisted on paying rent, so we'd settled on a nominal amount that helped her maintain her dignity while allowing her to save for her future. She'd already found freelance design work and was building a portfolio for a more permanent position. My phone buzzed with a text from James Henderson. "Trust documents finalized. All secure. How's lake life treating you?" I smiled, typing back, "Better than I deserve. Fish for dinner tonight. You should visit." As I set the phone down, I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. Diane's car pulled up, returning from her therapy appointment in town. She waved as she got out, looking more relaxed than I'd seen her in months. "The water's beautiful tonight," she called as she walked toward the deck, a small paper bag in her hand. "I brought dessert, that pie from the bakery you liked." Such a simple thing, remembering someone's preferences. Such a small kindness, and yet it meant everything. We sat together on the deck as twilight deepened, eating pie and watching the first stars appear. Neither of us mentioned Robert, or the trial that loomed in our future. or the nightmares that still woke us both in the small hours. Those conversations would come, but not tonight. I spoke with my sister today, Diane said after a comfortable silence. She's invited me to visit next month. I haven't seen her in years. Robert didn't get along with her. You should go, I encouraged. Reconnect with your family. She looked at me thoughtfully. That's what I'm doing right now, she said softly. The unexpected words warmed something inside me that had been cold for a long time. Family, not by blood, but by choice, by shared experience, by mutual respect and caring. Robert's betrayal had taught me painful lessons about trust, about greed, about the darkness that can hide behind familiar faces. But this new, unexpected connection with Diane was teaching me something else, that even after the deepest wounds, healing is possible. That family can be redefined. That betrayal doesn't have to be the end of the story. As the stars multiplied overhead, I thought about the long road that had led me here. The 50 years of saving and planning, the shocking discovery of my son's plot against me, the terror of that night when he tried to end my life, and now, this peaceful moment, beside a lake with a woman who had once been complicit in plans to take everything from me, but who had ultimately saved my life, and perhaps her own soul in the process. Life takes strange turns. Inheritance can mean many things: money, property, values, relationships. My son had wanted only the material wealth, willing to destroy everything else to get it. In doing so, he had lost it all. But here, in this unexpected place, with this unexpected companion, I had found a different kind of inheritance. Not one of money or possessions, but of second chances, of chosen family, of a future I never could have imagined. The trust would remain intact, protecting my assets as James and I had planned. But the real treasure wasn't in the trust at all. It was in this moment, in the choice to begin again, in the courage to open my heart after betrayal. Some might call it foolish. Perhaps it was, but as I sat beside Diane, watching the moon rise over the lake, I knew I wouldn't trade this hard-won peace for anything. The inheritance I'd spent a lifetime building would go to charity when I was gone, funding scholarships and programs to help others build their own futures. Robert would receive his stipend, the conditions unchanged, whether he used it wisely or not. And Diane would find her own path, with a little help to start. As for me, I had everything I needed right here, not the fortune I'd planned to leave behind, but something far more valuable: the freedom to write my own ending to this story. And that, I realized as the first stars reflected in the still water of the lake, was the greatest inheritance of all. 6 months passed, bringing changes with each turn of the season. The lakeside cottage transformed from a new dwelling to a true home. I planted flower beds that bloomed in riotous color, installed bird feeders that attracted a kaleidoscope of winged visitors, and found a rhythm to my days that felt both novel and deeply right. Diane had moved from the guest house into an apartment in town, close to the design studio where she'd secured a position. She still came for dinner every Sunday, bringing fresh bread from the local bakery and stories from her newfound independence. The bruises, both physical and emotional, had faded. She smiled more easily now, laughed more freely. Robert's trial had been delayed several times. Legal maneuverings by his defense team that James assured me were standard procedure. I'd been preparing myself for the ordeal of testifying, of facing my son across a courtroom, and recounting the night he'd tried to kill me. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. The call came on a Tuesday morning, as I was deadheading roses in my garden. Robert had accepted a plea deal: 20 years for attempted murder and conspiracy, with the possibility of parole after 15. There would be no trial, no public spectacle, no reliving of that terrible night in front of a jury. "Are you disappointed?" James asked when he delivered the news. "Some people want their day in court, want to face their attacker." I considered the question, clippers still in my gloved hand. "No," I said finally. "I have nothing to say to Robert that would change anything. and he has nothing to say that I need to hear. The truth was, I'd already mourned my son. The Robert who held the fire poker that night, who plotted my death for financial gain, wasn't the boy I'd raised. That boy was gone, lost somewhere along the way, to gambling addiction, desperation, and a moral bankruptcy I couldn't begin to understand. The man in prison was a stranger wearing my son's face. Life settled into new patterns. I joined a book club at the local library, volunteered at a shelter for women escaping domestic violence, and even tried my hand at painting, discovering to my surprise a modest talent for watercolors. I made friends, real friends who knew nothing of my wealth or my family tragedy, who liked me simply for who I was. The trust continued to function exactly as designed. Every month, a stipend was deposited into an account for Robert, accumulating for whenever he might be released. Quarterly reports showed that the investments were performing well, ensuring the longevity of the charitable foundations that would eventually benefit from my estate. On a crisp autumn day, almost a year after that fateful night, I received an unexpected visit. I was raking leaves when a dark sedan pulled into my driveway. A woman I didn't recognize emerged, middle-aged, professionally dressed, with a leather portfolio tucked under her arm. "Mrs. Miller?" she called, approaching with a tentative smile. "I'm Patricia Winters. I'm a social worker with the Department of Corrections. I'm sorry to drop in unannounced, but I wanted to speak with you in person." My heart stuttered. "Is it Robert? Has something happened?" "He's physically fine," she assured me quickly. "But he's asked me to deliver something to you. A letter." She held out an envelope, plain white with my name written on the front, in handwriting. I recognized immediately Robert's handwriting, the same careful script that appeared on Mother's Day cards, on notes left on the refrigerator, on the last letter he'd sent before that terrible night. "You don't have to take it," Patricia said gently, noticing my hesitation. "And you certainly don't have to respond. But in my professional opinion, there might be value in at least reading what he has to say." I accepted the envelope with trembling fingers. "Thank you for bringing this. Would you like some tea? I've just made a pot." She accepted the invitation, and we sat on my deck, overlooking the lake, steam rising from our mugs in the cool air. The envelope lay on the table between us, unopened. "He's different," Patricia said after a companionable silence. "Compared to when he first came in, the counseling, the medication for his anxiety, the Gamblers Anonymous meetings, they seem to be helping." "Is that unusual?" I asked. "For someone to change in prison?" She smiled sadly. "More unusual than it should be. The system isn't designed for rehabilitation, despite what they claim. But Robert, he's doing the work. Real work, not just going through the motions." "And you believe him? That the change is genuine?" She considered the question carefully. "I've been doing this job for 23 years, Mrs. Miller. I've developed a sense for who's playing a role, and who's genuinely transforming. Your son falls into the latter category, at least in my assessment. But," she added, "that doesn't obligate you to anything. Your safety and well-being come first." After she left, I sat for a long time with the unopened letter. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the lawn. A loon called mournfully from somewhere out on the lake. Finally, with a deep breath, I opened the envelope and began to read. "Dear Mom," Robert had written. "I've started this letter 100 times and each attempt seems more inadequate than the last. How do you apologize for trying to kill your own mother? There are no words big enough to contain such a monstrous act. No explanation that could possibly justify it. So, I won't try to explain or justify. I'll simply tell you the truth. I was sick. Addiction had warped my mind to the point where money meant more than human life. Even yours, the person who gave me life, who sacrificed everything for me, the person who loved me most in this world. In prison, without access to gambling, without the constant pressure of mounting debts, my mind has slowly cleared. Like waking from a nightmare to find that the monster was me all along. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect a relationship. I don't even expect you to finish reading this letter. But I needed you to know that I understand now what I did. I take full responsibility. And I am more sorry than words can express. Whatever life you're building now, I hope it brings you peace. You deserve that, and so much more. With deepest remorse, Robert. Tears blurred my vision as I set the letter down. Not tears of sadness, exactly, nor of joy. Perhaps they were tears of release, of finally setting down a burden I hadn't realized I was still carrying. Robert was right. There could be no forgiveness for what he'd done, no return to our former relationship, but there was a certain peace in knowing that he understood the magnitude of his actions, that the fog of addiction had lifted enough for him to see clearly the damage he had caused. I tucked the letter into a drawer in my desk, not hidden but not displayed either. Just another piece of my complex history, neither defining me nor forgotten entirely. That evening, as I walked along the lakeshore, the setting sun turning the water to liquid gold, I thought about inheritance again. Not the money that had nearly cost me my life, but the less tangible legacies we leave behind. My parents had left me a legacy of hard work and perseverance. I'd tried to leave Robert a legacy of love and opportunity, though somewhere along the way that transmission had failed. Now I was creating a new legacy, one that would benefit strangers through charitable foundations. Yes, but also one that lived in the smaller moments. The women at the shelter who found hope in my story of starting over at 78. The young couple next door who came for gardening advice and stayed for conversation, rebuilding her life with the knowledge that second chances are possible. The path ahead was uncertain, as all futures are. But for the first time in a very long time, that uncertainty felt like possibility rather than threat. My story wasn't over. The betrayal that had nearly ended my life had instead given me a new beginning. As darkness fell over the lake, stars appearing one by one in the deepening blue, I made a silent promise to myself to live these remaining years fully and authentically, to create a legacy not of wealth, but of compassion, to transform betrayal into wisdom that might help others. It wasn't the future I'd planned. It was in many ways better. 3 years passed, each season bringing its own gifts and challenges. My 79th, 80th, and 81st birthdays came and went, celebrated not with expensive dinners or lavish parties, but with simple gatherings of the friends who had become my chosen family. Diane flourished in her design career, eventually opening her own small studio in town. Her divorce from Robert was finalized, and she began dating a kind, soft-spoken accountant who treated her with the respect she deserved. She still came for Sunday dinners, sometimes bringing him along. I liked seeing her happy, seeing the confident woman who had emerged from the shadow of a controlling relationship. I received 2 more letters from Robert over those years. I read them both, acknowledging the continued evidence of his rehabilitation, but never responding. Some bridges, once burned, cannot be rebuilt, and perhaps shouldn't be. Instead, I focused on the life I was creating, the relationships that nourished me, the work that gave my days purpose. The shelter where I volunteered became a second home of sorts. Many of the women who sought refuge there were older, like me, women who had spent decades in abusive marriages, who had finally found the courage to leave, who were starting over with nothing but hope and determination. I recognized myself in their stories, though the abuse I'd suffered came not from a spouse, but from a child. Pain is pain, betrayal is betrayal, no matter the source. I began leading a support group specifically for older women, sharing the wisdom I'd gained from my own experience. It's never too late to start over, I would tell them. Never too late to reclaim your life. One crisp autumn day, much like the day Patricia Winters had delivered Robert's first letter, I received an unexpected visitor. I was in the garden, cutting the last of the season's roses, when a car pulled into my driveway. A young woman emerged, tall and slender with dark hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. There was something familiar about her, though I couldn't immediately place it. "Mrs. Miller," she called, approaching hesitantly. "I'm sorry to intrude. My name is Emma Lawrence. I'm Robert's daughter." The secateurs nearly slipped from my hand. "Robert's daughter? But he doesn't." I stopped. realizing what this must mean. He had a child I didn't know about. She nodded, looking uncomfortable. He and my mother were together briefly before he met Diane. When she got pregnant, he wanted nothing to do with us. Paid child support when the courts forced him to. But that was it. I gestured to the porch. Would you like to sit down? I can make some tea. That would be nice. Thank you. As I prepared the tea, my mind raced with questions. A granddaughter I'd never known existed. Another betrayal by Robert. Not just abandoning his own child, but keeping her existence secret from me. When I returned to the porch with the tea tray, Emma was examining a watercolor I had painted of the lake at sunset, displayed on the wall of the porch. This is beautiful, she said. Did you paint it? Yes, I replied, setting down the tray. It's a recent hobby. I've discovered I have a modest talent for it. She smiled, and in that smile I saw Robert, the young Robert, before gambling and desperation had twisted him into someone unrecognizable. My mother says I got my artistic side from the Miller family. I'm a graphic designer. Like Diane, I said, surprised by the coincidence. Yes, that's actually how I found you. Emma accepted a cup of tea. I've known about you for years. My mother told me I had a grandmother, though she didn't know much about you. When I decided to look for you, I searched online and found articles about what happened. She looked down at her tea. I'm sorry for what my father did to you. You have nothing to apologize for, I said firmly. You weren't responsible for his actions. Still, she insisted, it's horrible. No one should go through that, especially not at the hands of their own child. We sat in silence for a moment, the only sound the gentle lapping of water against the shore below, and the occasional call of a bird. After I read about what happened, Emma continued, I did more research. I found an article about a local design studio that had won an award for a campaign they did for a women's shelter. There was a photo of the team, and I recognized Diane from the court coverage, so I contacted her. Diane knew you were coming here today? I was surprised she hadn't mentioned it. Emma nodded. She wanted to make sure it was okay with you first, but I insisted on coming in person. I felt I needed to see you, to explain. Explain what, dear? Emma set down her teacup, her hands visibly trembling. I've been in contact with my father for about a year now. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. I see. It started with a letter. He found me somehow. I guess he always knew where I was, but chose not to be involved until now. He wrote that he was in prison, that he'd done terrible things, but that he was trying to make amends where possible. She glanced at me, then away. I ignored the first letter, and the second. But the third, something about it felt sincere. So I wrote back. I nodded, understanding all too well the complex emotions involved in receiving such communications from Robert. We've been corresponding regularly since then, Emma continued. He's told me everything about his gambling addiction, about what he did to you, about how deeply he regrets it all. He's different from what I expected. In what way? I asked, genuinely curious about how Robert presented himself to this daughter he'd abandoned. He's remorseful. Genuinely remorseful, I think. And he's not asking for anything, not money, not favors, not even forgiveness. He just wanted to acknowledge me as his daughter, to take responsibility for abandoning me. It aligned with what Patricia Winters had told me, with the content of Robert's letters to me. Perhaps the rehabilitation was genuine after all. He asked about you, Emma said hesitantly. Not where you live, or anything that might seem threatening, she added quickly. Just, if I ever met you, to tell you that he thinks of you every day, that he hopes you're at peace. I felt tears prick at my eyes, unexpected and unwelcome. Thank you for telling me. Emma reached into her bag and pulled out a small, wrapped package. I brought you something. A gift, I suppose, though that hardly seems adequate. I unwrapped it carefully to find a leather-bound sketchbook. Opening it, I discovered page after page of beautiful pencil drawings, landscapes, portraits, still lifes, all signed with a delicate EL in the corner. These are exquisite, I said, genuinely impressed by her talent. My mother says I get it from you, Emma said. She remembers Robert mentioning that his mother was artistic, though she never pursued it seriously. It was true. In another life, one where I hadn't needed to work multiple jobs to support Robert after his father died, I might have explored art more seriously. How strange that this genetic gift had skipped a generation, manifesting in a granddaughter I'd never known existed. I'd like to get to know you, Emma said directly. If you're open to it, I understand. If you're not, if it's too painful, or if you want nothing to do with anyone connected to Robert. I studied her face. This young woman, who shared my blood, but was a complete stranger. She had Robert's eyes, but there was an openness in them that his had lost long ago. A sincerity that shone through her nervousness. I'd like that too, I said, surprising myself with how much I meant it. But I need you to understand something. My relationship with Robert, whatever is left of it, is separate from any relationship you and I might develop. I won't be a conduit for messages from him, and I won't discuss him beyond what I've already shared. Emma nodded. I understand. That's fair. Then yes, I'd very much like to get to know my granddaughter. The smile that lit up her face was worth any risk I might be taking in opening my heart to another member of my complicated family. In the weeks that followed, Emma became a regular visitor to the lakeside cottage. She brought her sketchbooks, and we sometimes sat together on the deck, she drawing while I painted, working in companionable silence. She told me about her life, her career, her hopes for the future. I shared stories of my own youth, of her grandfather whom she'd never had the chance to meet, of the world I'd grown up in that seemed so foreign to her generation. We never spoke of Robert directly, honoring the boundary I'd established, but his presence hovered between us nonetheless, the invisible thread that connected us, for better or worse. Diane was hesitant at first, understandably wary of anyone connected to Robert, but Emma's genuine nature and obvious desire to forge her own path, separate from her father's misdeeds, eventually won Diane over. The three of us sometimes had dinner together, an unconventional family unit bound not by traditional ties but by chosen connections and shared experiences. As my 82nd birthday approached, I found myself reflecting on the strange journey that had brought me to this point. The betrayal that had nearly cost me my life had, paradoxically, led to a richness of experience I might never have known otherwise. I had found genuine friendships, meaningful work, artistic expression, and now a connection with a granddaughter who brought unexpected joy to my later years. The trust remained intact, its structure unchanged. Robert's stipend continued to accumulate in an account he could access upon release. The charitable foundations that would eventually receive the bulk of my estate were already doing good work in the world, funding scholarships for older women returning to education and supporting shelters for those escaping domestic violence. My material inheritance, the fortune I'd spent 50 years building, would still make a difference in the world, though not in the way I'd originally planned. But the true legacy, I realized, was in the lives I touched, the stories I shared, the wisdom I passed on to others walking similar paths. On the morning of my birthday, I woke early and walked down to the shore as the sun rose over the lake. The water was still, reflecting the pink and gold of the dawn sky. A pair of loons called to each other in the distance, their haunting cry echoing across the water. I thought about the many lives I'd lived within this one life. Daughter, wife, mother, widow, betrayed, survivor, artist, mentor, friend, grandmother. Each role had shaped me, taught me, brought me to this moment. Robert's betrayal had nearly ended my story. Instead, it had given me a new chapter, one filled with more authenticity and purpose than I could have imagined. The inheritance I'd guarded so carefully, that had nearly cost me everything, had ultimately led me to something far more valuable: the freedom to live truthfully, to connect deeply, to give generously without expectation of return. As I stood at the water's edge, watching the new day dawn over the lake, I felt a profound sense of peace. Not because the pain of betrayal had disappeared, it would always be a part of my story, but because I had refused to let it define me. I had chosen, instead, to define myself by my resilience, by my capacity for growth, by my willingness to begin again even in the winter of my life. That, I realized, was the true inheritance I would leave behind. Not the money and the trust, but the example of a life reclaimed from the ashes of betrayal. A legacy of courage, of authenticity, of the power of choosing one's own path, regardless of age or circumstance. And in that legacy, I had found the greatest wealth of all.